you live in California, cultivating a secure and abundant water future is a goal we can all support. But taking the necessary steps to get there can be really hard, especially as we watch our state whipsaw from one weather extreme to another. In just 12 months, this state has gone from historic and severe drought to above average rainfall and snow. Many people are now appropriately asking, is the drought over? That's the wrong question. Welcome to What Matters Water TV and Podcast. I'm your host, Charley Wilson, and thank you for being with us. Today, we're going to talk to two water leaders who are trying to push the conversation about California water beyond the drought. What they want to know is, what will California and its water supply look like in 10 years, in 20, in 50 years? And how can we take steps today to ensure that the things we love about California are preserved for everyone who lives here in a fair and sustainable way? We have with us Heather Dyer, a returning visitor to the show. Heather's the CEO and general manager of the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District, and she happens to be an endangered species biologist. We also have a first-time guest, Craig Miller, who's the general manager of the Western Municipal Water District. For the past year, Craig and Heather have been leading the charge to unite water agencies and others toward a new effort to spur investment in water infrastructure. They say that the state's network for water delivery should be upgraded and changed to meet emerging and changing needs. They bring innovative ideas and a fresh perspective to some difficult problems, and they're getting some pretty good attention up and down the state. Today, we're going to talk to them both about California water's infrastructure challenges, how by working together we can move beyond crisis or survival mode into a future of abundance and water security. So welcome. And let's dive right in. Well, welcome to What Matters Water TV and Podcast. And I'd like formally to welcome today, we've got two really dynamic guests. Craig Miller, who's the general manager of the Western Municipal Water District, and someone you have seen and heard before, Heather Dyer at San Bernardino Valley. Thank you both for joining us. We get a chance to talk a little bit today about sort of, what is it in the water industry we kind of need to be doing? There's a lot of conversation we have here about, weather and cycles and climate change. And we've talked a lot about a variety of issues, but we've never really sat down to sort of scope out from the expertise that you two have about what exactly is this issue of, or the problem as you see it from a source or a supply standpoint. So I guess, Craig, I kind of want to open with you. And it's kind of that basic fundamental question. It's, what is the problems you see it, particularly since, this is one of those years where we go long periods of dry and then all of a sudden we have lots of snow and lots of water. And this appears to be shaping up as one of those years where we have some water and some snow. And I think a lot of people are starting to ask the question, what is the problem? Hey, it's all solved, right? Aren't we all done? We just need these kinds of events more often.
Yeah, well, Charlie, thanks for having me with you here today. It's great to be here. I think if it just rained like this every year, we'd be great. All we have to do is have a wet year every single year. But the reality is that California, especially Southern California, is always going to have a majority of dry years, and then we're going to have some really wet years. And what I see is that we are not able to control our water supply and take advantage of the wet years to survive the dry years. And, when we look at just what's happened in the last few years, 2017 was the wettest year on record. 2018 was dry. 2019 was wet again. So we refilled everything. And by 2021, we were at a zero allocation in the state water project. So I think when I look at it, water managers plan for 30 years out, yet our statewide water system isn't functioning on a 30-year cycle. We're not even functioning on a 5-year cycle. So when I look at it, it's like we got a lot of work to do. We're a huge economy in this world, and we can't be in survival mode every 5 years. So I think that's the biggest issue to me.
So, Heather, from your perspective, is it an issue of climate and what years we get versus sort of how the state or locals, or is it a planning issue? I personally, I go back far enough when I still had hair that you could talk about how the state water project was initially constructed, but it was really deliberately only done at like, half of it. There was supposed to have been the other half was to follow, and it never quite did. And sort of here we are talking about what, when, where, and how things have changed. But is it a source issue or is it a management issue?
I think it's both, Charlie. So, well, first off, can you imagine if we had the same freeway system in California that we had in the late 60s and 70s? It would be a disaster, right? But we've invested in improvements along the way to maintain capacity for whatever the current needs are, arguably, in some cases, maybe less than others. But we've realized that needs change over time. And so we've made those investments. The State Water Project was built right around the time I was born. Yet we have, not made those same type of infrastructure investments in increasing and maintaining necessary capacity for that very important piece of infrastructure. And like Craig said, a lot of people don't tie reliable water supply to our economy. We're the fifth largest economy in the world, yet we do not have a reliable water supply going into the future. And so, how do we maintain this way of life that we have in California without making those sorts of investments? So, that's one thing, is just investing in necessary infrastructure. But then, on top of that, with climate change challenges and constraints, essentially, we have this new set of challenges where the future does not look like the past. Craig is a engineer, so he loves modeling, and hydrologic models. They take the past and try to predict the future. However, with climate change, it's kind of an unknown, right? We know that there will be changes to our hydrologic cycle that we have not seen before. It's predicted that they will be more basically volatile. We'll have years of huge rains like we have this year in certain areas of the state, followed by probably lengthy droughts. There may not be a snowpack in the future, depending on temperatures and where you are in California. Those variables need to be taken into consideration as we're looking at that future supply and infrastructure that we need. And to date, we haven't done a great job at looking at that future in terms of planning. And so it's both of those things. It's investing in infrastructure that is necessary and has been necessary for, several decades, but then adding on top of that this new challenge of climate change conditions going forward.
Well, Greg, something Heather just said though is, does that make sort of those of you in the water industry kind of, hey, what's been going on? If we've never had a shortage, we've never not served anyone, how do we make the argument to folks that we're in decline, that we are short, that we're in danger, we need to do some new investment?
Yeah, I kind of phrase it, Charlie, like our outstanding record of service and success is really hurting us as a water industry. So, we preach to our own customers in our own service area that we're resilient and reliable 100% of the time. And I'll brag a little bit about the water industry, and we have done a fantastic job at doing that. Even though we know as water managers, big picture water in the state is not making the same investments that we are locally. My agency is investing a lot of water in local groundwater resources and recycled water and brackish desal. And I go to my ratepayers, my customers, and I can convince them that it's really important that we invest in water certainty. And I think that's a big problem, is that we're not seeing that at a higher level. So we're willing to invest locally, and we've done a really good job of investing local. But this state was built on this interactive water supply between the Colorado River, Northern California, and our local resources. And like Heather said, with her analogy of building a freeway, it's almost like you had the freeways, and then all of a sudden you said, well, you know what? You can't use the 5 freeway to get from north to south anymore. So good luck. You're going to be on side streets. And I kind of feel like that's where we are. It's like we've got great local groundwater resources, but you can't, we live in an adjudicated groundwater world in Southern California. We just can't go drop more wells and keep pumping. There's legal rules that prohibit us from doing that. So we were built with the promise of external water supplies to feed our area, and we need to keep growing those. And I think the money is there. I think the investment's there. I think we do affordability analysis all the time. There's what I would say is headroom in affordability. And so we need to invest. The cost of not investing is enormous. But I think because we've been so successful, that risk of us not being successful is non-existent with the public.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of joke around that with my board that we should have a 5-day shutoff this year. And we'll get everyone's attention, right? We'll never have another problem justifying water supply. But of course, I'll be fired as a general manager that suggested the 5-day shutoff. But maybe it's worth it for the rest of the industry if I sacrifice. But I think we are a victim of our success.
Well, to that point, and then you made the roadway analogy, right? Certainly, there've been some freeway, some highway construction. We also started putting people into carpool lanes and finding mass transit and doing new technology.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that I think, even if I go back far enough, for some of us who are old enough, back to the 70s and the gas shortages and people waiting in line and alternating days to buy gas, until it became impactful upon an individual, the individual consumer, it wasn't real. And so I guess the question I ask is, as we sit here and talk about at the state level, Heather, we talk about all of the competing priorities with housing and transportation, education and healthcare, pandemics. How do you kind of make the case that, hey, state, because I'm hearing you say, Craig, it's the state, what? Pony up. You need to step up your game. You're leaving us down here at the local level to do it ourselves, kind of akin to if we're using the traffic analogy, I'm the local city and I got to build all the connectors to get my city to other places so goods, services, and other things can be moved and utilized.
Well, I think that, everyone understands the concept of your bank account, right? And so you have a job, you get a paycheck every 2 weeks, you have your budget, you're living off of it. But if you lose your job and your income, you have to shift to savings. And that's what we've been doing during these dry years. We've been pumping groundwater. We've been using, some places are out of savings. And they're, as my 10-year-old says, they're in a pickle. Some of our general manager friends, had to put in flow restrictors in this last year. So, we're a wholesale agency. We bring water from Northern California. We've been on 5% allocation. So we've been living off of 5% of our normal amount of water delivered from Northern California. And you can only do that for a while. Eventually, you got to start getting a little bit nervous. You start retrenching. You start, maybe taking on some side gigs, all these different things to supplement your income. And that's what we are saying, is that we've been living off of savings. It's not sustainable over the long term, and we need to be investing in additional supply. This idea that conservation is going to meet all of our needs, which is a very popular idea, it won't cut it. The water managers from across the state have been saying urban conservation does not meet the needs for the future. We absolutely have to be planning and building for more water supply. Again, if you think about how has this state changed since the 50s, 60s, 70s, how many more people are there? How many more industries are there? We're a very diverse state with a huge tapestry of things that are going on in our state that require water, yet we still are relying on this same old model. And one thing that I find frustrating, to be honest, is that a lot of people don't think of California as one whole. So there becomes a lot of potential conflict and just discord over Northern California versus Southern California, or coastal versus urban, or inland, and urban versus ag. In reality, our economy is tied together. And so therefore, it doesn't make a lot of sense to separate ourselves out into different interest groups, because we all send money to Sacramento, and then that funding is basically put back out into the state. And it's one of the things that makes our economy so strong, is that we have this diversity. And so when I talk about the state needs to have a vision, it's because of our state economy that is reliant upon all of these different industries to have that, robust future. And so in order to do that, we have to have reliable water supply. And you're right, if everything is a crisis, then nothing is a crisis. But I can guarantee reliable water supply is a crisis. I promise you.
Well, Charley, maybe if I could add one more thing before we kind of leave that topic of us being successful, and so it's not relevant to the public that there's a water shortage. I find it really frustrating that we had 6 million residents in Southern California within the Met family that were in 1 day a week outdoor watering, and Metropolitan was ordering health and safety water from the state. I've been doing this for 30 years. I had to look up what is health and safety water. I was unaware of that until it just happened. And that means that there was literally not enough water going to certain parts of Southern California for them to survive. They had to go to the state and get special permission to get additional water sent down here on top of the 5% allocation so that certain areas could survive. That didn't make the news. It was like a 1 day thing. Hey, there's going to be 1 day outdoor a week watering. I think the public shrugged their shoulders and said, oh, well, it's not me. I think we're good. And it just shocks me that we can't get our news media interested in a real story like that. I mean, what could be more important? Well, I guess if we ran out of air, that would be really important. But water's number 2, Charley. It's the second most valuable natural resource in the world. And Southern California, think of all the resources and money we have in Southern California. We were ordering health and safety water. So I agree, maybe it's going to take a major disaster and a 3 or 5 day shutoff to get people's attention. But we pitched the story to the news media that this is significant for Southern California residents to understand that we need to rally behind this. And there was no interest by the media to cover the story. But this is news.
Well, we're covering the story here, so we're cutting edge right now. Okay, so we're putting it out there. But let me ask you this though, because before I get to the kind of the list or sort of the things that you studied that you think should be done that are appropriate for the state to be investing in, because the argument, and Heather, you touched on it a little bit, was this issue of conservation. So as you say, we are at 5% allocation. We're not getting a lot of water from the State Water Project. We're not getting hardly anything out of the Colorado at this point because of the issues up there. That confluence of two major systems all sort of in a crisis, point themselves. Those would argue, well, why are you in Southern California still watering outdoor yards? Why aren't you cutting that back? Why aren't you eliminating that? Why aren't you doing what Vegas and what Phoenix and what Tucson have done? Why are you still allowing, a use of water, by any measure, 50 to 60% of our water use? Why are you allowing that to go to turf or lawns as opposed to then going to that health and safety water you referred to?
Well, Craig is a retailer, so I should probably let him answer this, but I will tell you, because change is hard. And I really believe that there's going to have to be a shift in kind of everyone's approach to water management, and things are going to be lost. That is just, we can't have everyone getting everything that they want. And so there needs to be a conversation about trade-offs and what is most important to us. And so a lot of areas, we went out to a conference out in the desert, and there was a lot of people from Israel there, and they were saying, oh my gosh, look at all this green grass. Well, a lot of it is recycled water, right? Because we know that the industry in that particular part of our state is very economically viable, and they need green grass on the golf courses to sustain that. And so they've invested in recycled water to irrigate all those areas. That kind of calculus of return on investment is very important all over the state for many, many different industries. And I have an environmental background, endangered species biology, and I will be the first one to tell you, some species will be lost. We can't save everything. Some agriculture will have to be fallowed. We can't have the same old, standard way of doing business. Urban areas, likely, in the future, we're not going to have lawns. Certainly in new build areas, we don't have the same standards that we've had in the past. And so everyone needs to figure out, like, what is the most important thing that we need to maintain in order to have these goals that we have? What does the California economy look like 50 years from now? What does the California environment look like 50 years from now, so that we can meet those standards of living and the culture that we've come to expect and love about living in California? And that's a conversation we have not had. We have not talked about the trade-offs. We have not talked about what it's really going to take. How much water do we need for the future that we want? And then we can plan and build for it. One thing I wanted to clarify is that, a lot of people don't know that the modeling doesn't actually show that there will be less water in the future. In some cases, models show there will be, approximately the same amount. However, it's going to come in a different pattern and different ways of precipitating that we are not prepared for. So we'll have large rain events, probably, 9 atmospheric rivers in December and January we had. Like, that seems crazy to me, but that's actually probably going to be more of a new normal going forward in the future. What does loss of snowpack mean? That has been a major savings account for us. With temperature increases, we predicted that they'll go away. So planning for that water need for the future, accepting reality of climate change, that's the conversation that we need to have as a state, as a whole.
So Craig, you been organizing general managers, the water experts, the engineers that can engineer us out of most anything, right? You just give me the time and the money, I can design whatever you need. What is it from your perspective, and what have your colleagues come up with that you think is appropriate for the state to invest, to build, and then to manage?
Yeah, so these are engineering solutions. You're dead on there. Engineers know how to build reservoirs. We know how to build pipelines. We know how to build pump stations. We know how to build ocean desal. I don't really like the phrase all of the above strategy, which is such the buzz phrase these days. But all of the water supply categories need to continue, and we need to get more of all of the water supply categories. So it's recycled water. And, I look at where Heather and I live in the Santa River watershed. We're fully recycled. The argument we have is who gets the recycled water first. It's not whether we should recycle or not recycle. So we're a model. Everyone should be the same way. So there's recycling that needs to happen. And there's big projects in LA, and Metropolitan has big project, and San Diego has a big project. But you're quickly going to get to the point where those big projects are fully utilized. So the recycling is going to diminish. So then what do you do? So Heather's hit it on a number of times. There's going to be just as much water. It's just going to come in a different form, which means that you can't count on snowpack to hold the water for months on end for you. So you're going to have to replace that with reservoirs. And there's just no two ways about it. And those reservoirs are going to be good for the business community, the ag community, the urban community, Northern California, Southern California. Environment needs that water. So, there isn't this war going on. It's like a made up war. We've got coalition of general managers from across the state. No one's in this coalition is saying Northern versus Southern. They're not saying ag versus urban. We've got everyone at the table. And guess what? And the reason we form these coalitions is because all of us were saying the exact same thing. We have to increase our ability to capture and move water around the state. The state was built on that. It's not going to stop. And we have to use our engineering expertise to do it. This isn't difficult. It is standard practice. We just have to get our act together as a water community and stick together. We're not very good at that, Charlie. We like to outcompete each other. I want to take $3 million away from Heather and one of her projects so I can build my project. I'm done with that. I'm not going to argue with Heather ever again. We're gonna combine our efforts to get $6 million instead of $3 million, so we can each get $3 million. and make the pot of water, make the pie of water bigger. That's what has to happen. We have to be planning for abundance, not for shortage. You know, we are managing our water system over the last few decades in shortage. And it is, who are we going to steal water from? Because for some reason, we don't want to build new water. We're going to steal water from someone else. And that just starts the fights.
Well, I was going to say
there's no reason for that.
That's kind of the historical fight, right? The narrative that sort of took root back in the 80s with the peripheral canal. It kind of, I'm amazed, still exists today when you get into subregions. It's, oh, you know, those people from the South are coming to steal, quote, steal our water. And you're simply looking to drain the Sacramento Delta, or you're looking to starve off the entire upper 7 states of the Colorado River shit.
Charlie, don't say that anymore. See, people
pointing at each other.
They're going to snip what you just said, and it'll become a soundbite for someone else. But Heather already hit on it. It's hard for people to change, and there's still people that have been in this water industry for a really long time that'll come up to me and they'll say, "Well, Craig, you're never going to be successful changing the mindset of the water industry in the state," and I think they're wrong. I think we're going to change because we have to adapt. And if we don't adapt, we're dead. So we're going to adapt. It's how long it's going to take to adapt. Do we have to wait for a disaster? Do we have to wait till, you know, someone runs out of water and you have some economic disaster before we start adapting? I don't think so. I don't think it's that hard. We just have to stop fighting with each other. We have to put our egos aside. And we have to work together. And it sounds like kindergarten, right? We're just all going to play along nicely, right, in the sandbox. But we've got decades of history of not playing nicely together as water professionals, and we got to get on the same page.
Well, it
and
strikes
if we can start making the pie big enough, there's absolutely no reason to fight anymore.
Well, it strikes me we've sort of been through this already. We all recently experienced that transformation that was supposed to take place in the electric utility business. And up to that point, we had never experienced outages either. And the unconscionable ultimately ended up taking place. You had rolling blackouts and operating that infrastructure system on the edge of collapse now, it seems, almost annually. Are we headed down the same path for water, Heather?
Oh, this reminds me of this story I have to tell you guys. So I think it was about September. It was during the time of the blackouts and or the potential blackouts. And I remember getting a phone call. It was like a Friday evening, and it was a young woman from basically one of the big cabinet offices in Sacramento. And she was like, "Oh, I'm calling general managers to see if you can go off of the grid this weekend because we think it might, you know, basically go down." And I was shocked, like stunned, because I was thinking, again, we're the 5th largest economy in the world, and we have someone cold calling general managers, asking them to go off of the grid if they can, so that we can, you know, preserve the system. And at the same time, I was hearing about, you know, some of our Southern California water counterparts who were on health and safety water, and it just was so flabbergasting to me that this is where we are, and we know there are solutions, yet we have failed to get the will and the like political push to change it. And I just was like stunned that how can this be possible in the state of California? And if you think about our contribution to the national economy and even the global economy, what does it mean for California to not have power and water in terms of the rippling effects throughout our national economy and beyond? Is that an acceptable outcome? I don't think so. Yet we got to get ourselves together, you know? And so if there's collective consequences for doing nothing, then that should be motivation for collective solutions to solve the problem.
You know, Charlie, Heather and I have had this conversation before offline. It's like, hey, Heather, do you think it's acceptable that we stop producing food in the Central Valley Is that where our state wants to go? And if that's where our state wants to go, then yeah, we can shuffle water around. But you know, the climate adaptation and climate change is going to put food production in a worldwide challenge. And we have the ability to avoid that by investing in water infrastructure. And food security is going to be a national security issue. It's going to be a state issue. It's going to be a worldwide issue. Shifting water away from ag to urban is not the solution. And no one in the urban environment should want to do that, because I like to eat and drink. And I am all on board with having a healthy ag industry. And we, as urban water providers, need to support that. Just like right now, we have ag providers, ag general managers, who are fully supportive of water going to the urban providers. So we need to play nicely together. And this is the first time in my career where I'm starting to hear this collaboration across the entire state on water issues. We have to get our legislators there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the great question then I was going to ask. So how do you get a legislative body with, as diverse as the state is large, with a variety of seemingly crises at every turn, pulling at every corner, whether it's homelessness, crime, transportation, education, healthcare. I mean, we seem to, I won't say manufacture, but there's a lot of needs, right? There's a lot of people trying to get at the job of that legislator. So how do you get the attention? How do you get the prioritization? How do you, and without something catastrophically happening where you have to respond as a state, how do you do that?
Well, I think something like this, like one thing that we're not very good at in the water industry is telling our own story. Folks like Craig, they make it look easy, right? You build things, you serve water, the tap always, comes on. But that's because, we've been working to have reliability. We're looking at the future. So I'm not even thinking about this drought. I'm thinking about 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now. What does the supply system look like? And it's hard to make that case, honestly, if basically decisions are made on a short-term basis. And, many of our lawmakers, they're in office for a certain period of time, then they move on to the next thing. It's easy to get distracted with every new administration, and there's just lots of opportunities for people to lose sight of the bigger vision, that we really need everyone to be working towards that same goal. And so it's very challenging to get everyone kind of on the same page, understanding that this is a generational issue and a generational investment that we are making. I'm not going to be here in 30 years, but my child will still be here in the watershed, likely. My grandchildren might be here. And so what Craig and I are talking about, it's not for us. Honestly, it would be easier if we just ignored it and built our own projects and, dealt with our own jobs. But to me, that's not the right thing to do. And I'm looking at the future and realizing that the only way we will be successful in this large scale vision of California water reliability is by working together, across the aisle, across the state, with people who aren't like us. They don't care about the same things, in Northern California as maybe I do in Southern California. But having a recognition that we value our fellow Californians and what they contribute to our state, and that we value having a healthy environment. We value fishermen, we value farmers, we value tech industry. We value having a pool if you have a family. Like, all of these things are part of what it is to be a Californian. And so I think that's the story that we need to tell. Is it's not, like Craig said, we're not suggesting we take things away from each other. That's not the global solution. I'm saying let's work together to have more.
Yeah, I got mine. The rest of you on your own.
Yeah. Yeah, the strongest will survive. That's not where we need to
No.
be as Californians. And Charlie, one of the things that we're really trying to change is how do we market to our legislators and our local electeds? That has never been part of our game. We have a weak game when it comes to marketing. And Heather said, we don't toot our own horns. Uh, we don't even go up to Sacramento and share what is really important. So I always have this perspective that, I go up there to talk about Western water and talk about my projects. And now I go up and I talk about statewide water issues. And the overarching response I get from my legislators is, we had no idea. We had no idea that there was health and safety water being served. What? What are you talking about, Craig? And I think what really happens is, we just want to do our job as water professionals. We don't want to have to go and ask for things. We don't want to have to go and build a case for sound investment in what's so important to our economy and our state. So we don't do it very well. But the other side does. So if I go up and talk to a legislator, I have this little mental tally sheet going, and there's probably 100 different competing interests that go up every month and talk to the legislators about something that's the most important thing in the world. And then I go up. So I'm 1 out of 100. So 1% of the people went in and talked to him and said, water is the vitality of this state. We have to maintain it. And then 99 other people are in there going, no, don't do that. That's a waste of money and time. So we got to get our marketing game going. And I really appreciate what you do with this series, because you're helping the marketing game. And we are not going to go very far without it. And, I'm a nerdy engineer, and I went into, the water world because I didn't know anything about marketing or advertising or anything else. And now that's all I do all day long. So,
and now I'm on the absolute opposite side. I was promised in my role there'd be no math. And so don't make me calculate or design anything. So let me just go talk to people. So let me ask you this, okay? Because I mean, we have an issue, right? There's clearly a need, and you struck me where I live, right? The ability to coalesce different stories and people, a variety of interests, to go and to be able to articulate and educate, and then advocate on behalf of their own self-interest as to where we should be from a water resiliency, a water supply, a water standpoint for the state of California. But I get from both of you in this discussion, I'm getting an incredible passion. Not that, and I love all my engineer friends, but Craig, I don't get the kind of passion from an engineer that I get out of you for this. Why have you, what is it in your background? What is it about you that it's like, hey, you know what? I need to now put myself at risk and go to Sacramento and be that 1% that sits in front of legislators and audiences and starts really banging the drum about, hey, we have an issue we really need to collectively address?
well, I think the biggest point, Charlie, is that I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. And so I think I was the only one that didn't say, no, I'm not going to do that. I look at that all the time, and I've been asked this a lot as I've been working with these coalitions to change things. And I'm like, why is Little Western doing this? And overwhelmingly, as I've been in this for 30 years, and I want to make change. And I don't want to make change for the sake of change. I want to make change because I see this as a pivotal point in this state's economy. I don't see it like Western is going to get much out of this. Thank goodness I have a board of directors that is on the same page and they're fully supportive of my efforts. But Heather and I have been beating the drum that this is unbelievably important to the state. And I would feel like I never did my job as a general manager if I didn't step up and try and change things. And I think a lot of this is my sports background. I grew up playing sports, as you know. And, if you're behind in a football game by 28 points at halftime, you don't go get on the bus and go home. You figure out a new game plan and you figure out, how am I going to be competitive? And then you score one touchdown And then you talk about, how do I get another touchdown? How do I get another one? And I think that's really where we are. We literally are trying to get the state to plan long-term for water supply. I am shocked that I'm having to say that, but we have to have a 30-year plan for this state to meet long-term water supply goals, because we are planning on a year-by-year basis. We literally are praying for rain. That's our strategy right now. And I heard it, I hear it out of our Sacramento people that plan for, the state water project allocation. They're like, well, it rained in December, but boy, we are not out of the woods. We have our fingers crossed that it's going to continue to rain for another month so we can change the allocation. And I look at that as a planner and I'm like, oh my gosh, we can do so much better. And I don't want to just blame the state for doing that. They have to have the support and the backup of our legislators and our taxpayers and our local electeds. They can't be hanging out there. We should have our local communities going to their legislators saying, hey, go up there in Sacramento and invest in our water system so that I can own a business in Riverside and I can flourish. We have to give them cover. We can't just blame them and, hang them out there. We have to support them. And I think a lot of this is we're here to help. And, we do a lot of work. I'm a member agency. Heather's a state water contractor. I want to support both of them. I don't want to send Metropolitan up to Sacramento and back to Washington, D.C. to do all the fighting. I want to be right there next to them and behind them and in front of them, whatever it takes to help them lobby for what we need to do. And so I don't know. I just feel a calling to do it. I'm in a position to do it. And I'm having a lot of fun and we got to be successful.
So Heather, I'm just going to ask the question. Have you actually ever stepped on a tennis court with Craig Miller?
No, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that not happen. So, because you're going to find out what that real competitive spirit is.
I'm the opposite. I actually am very uncomfortable with competitive situations. I prefer collaboration and cooperation. So we make the perfect pair. I have found, I think my background as a biologist actually makes me very well suited to tackle this, because biology is all about adaptive management. Conditions change, animals don't always do exactly what you think they're going to do. Habitat changes. So you got to be able to adapt. You have to be able to pivot, and you have to have lots of tools in the toolbox. And I think, like Craig said, I don't want us to come across as like saying, oh, the state is, terrible at their job. That's not what we're saying at all. We're saying they have an extremely hard job to do, and having us be their advocate and support system, like going out there and saying, like, let us be part of the solution, is the way we're going to achieve this. And, this is a big picture vision that we're talking about, long-term, statewide. And, so interestingly, I'm not a natural born Californian. I've lived in several other states, from Alaska to Tennessee, Louisiana. I was born in Seattle. And so I choose to live here and I love it. And I think that if you've always grown up in California, maybe you forget how special it is. But the fact that we have this tremendous diversity of people and environments and industries, like, that's amazing. And I feel this call to really preserve that, so that my child and my grandchildren, they get to experience the California that, that I love so much. And so to me, it's a calling that goes beyond me as an individual. And I think that's what Craig and I are really saying, is that it goes beyond any specific governor. It goes beyond any, head of DWR or any general manager. It's about the collective good and well-being for the people of our state and the environment of our state and the natural resources and the tremendous bounty that we have. And being able to preserve that for the future, I think, is my duty as a public servant, my passion as, a problem solver. And like Craig and I were talking about the statewide general managers meeting, like, if it's not us who's willing to go out there and get out in front and advocate for it, then who will?
Ooh.
Exactly. If not us, who? And if not now, when? Like, we can't wait any longer to advocate for a big visionary solution to be put into place for the future.
Well, I appreciate the passion from both of you. I had opportunity not very long ago to speak to a group that had one of our leading congressional members who is one of those real industry leaders on water, which in and of itself is a very rare thing. I asked them the very same thing. I asked the audience of a little over 100, say, hey, and what have you done to help that lady over there, advance your needs in Congress? Or are you just satisfied to let her go out there on her own? I got the biggest smile out of a member of Congress, like, oh, thank goodness somebody's finally bringing some resources to the table to help me. So you're hitting exactly where we live at the Southern California Water Coalition, and that is, how do we build the coalition? How do you build the blocks? Because it's not just me against them. It's, if you have the collective and people understand, they'll stand up for their own particular interest, whether it's in ag or in labor or in environmental community. I mean, you can't have it in either or anymore, is what I'm hearing you say. And we've got to find a way to make the balance, but we have to make it a priority. Making it a priority requires a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of effort. And if you're not willing to invest your own personal time and commitment, then, as you say, who's going to do it for you? Because inevitably somebody's more than happy to do it to you than they are to do it for you. So I absolutely applaud the commitment and the passion that both of you bring to this. We really look forward to working with you. And as things evolve, we're going to work collaboratively. We're going to work together, and we're going to see if we can't raise that bar and find a couple of touchdowns so we can try to crawl back into this game, Greg.
Charlie, we can do it.
That's it. See,
it is hard. It's hard, and it's different for us and in the water industry, and it's time to change. And I get a lot of pushback from other water managers. Well, Craig, I don't think this is going to work. It hasn't worked before, so what makes you think it's going to work now? And well, we just haven't tried hard enough before, and it's time. And we need to change. And this isn't, it's not like we're asking for things that are impossible to do. These are proven engineering projects that can solve all of this. It's just prioritization of money, resources, and effort. And we have to all get on the same page that we're going to prioritize water.
And I would just add, Charlie, that, we talked a lot about engineering solutions today, but for my environmental friends out there, I am advocating for water for everything. And I believe that there are solutions in the form of water projects that will make the environment more sustainable over time. And, the environment suffers during drought just as much as the rest of us. Fish need water during drought. So let's figure out how these water projects can address those needs. And so that's what I'm saying, is that, like, gone are the days where, Craig was taking me out at the knees over 100 acre feet worth of water. I want to be advocating for all of those interests, that they have enough water to sustain their needs, that we all have enough water to sustain our needs, again, so that we can maintain California as this, wonderful way of life. And that narrative has shifted, I would say, in the last 2 years for sure. Many diverse interests sitting around the table talking about how we can work together. How can we design environmental benefits into projects? How can we, make these assessments of what we need for the future? So I am feeling very hopeful, and I feel like we're on the right track in terms of the conversation and the narrative that we want to have.
Well, I very much appreciate it. And what I'm hearing and taking away from today's conversation is that it's not so much the change that people are objecting to, because we all want the change to an abundant and water secure future. It's that transition people seem to be fighting. It's like, just like, hey, I'd love the end game and the goal of, losing 10 to 15 pounds. It's that transition of, putting down my fork that I'm really fighting at this point. And we need to be able to do the work, do the disciplined work, to be able to do the transition so that we get the outcome and we get the change that everybody really expects and needs. And so I very much appreciate you guys being with us, helping to explain that. And we look forward to working with you in the future. So Craig, Heather, thanks again for being with us on What Matters Water TV.
Thank you, Charlie. Enjoyed
Follow
it.
up
Thanks,
fun.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Well, thanks for joining us on What Matters Water, TV, and Podcast. If you like today's discussion, go wherever you download your podcasts and give us that 5-star rating. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. That'll help us build our presence in this new world and in this format. And if you're interested in helping sponsor the program, please reach out to us at socalwater.org and send us a message. Now, as we close out today's show, I leave you with this challenge. Be a part of the conversation. Be a part of the solution. At the Southern California Water Coalition, we educate to advocate. So as public policy leaders have difficult choices, together we help them make informed decisions. Thanks for being with us. We will see you again next time on What Matters Water, TV, and Podcast.